For years, a friend of mine spoke of a woman who made him feel seen in a business where you're highly visible but rarely known. This makes complete sense to me now that I have met her for myself. IMDB describes Lauralee Farrer as an award-winning movie director, producer, and a master storyteller. She is all of these things, and also a mystic and a monastic. Lauralee's ability to see and create out of the depths of the human condition while holding in tension the reality of eternity that is here and now leads us away from our desire for control and beckons us towards our primary purpose, to love God and our neighbor, trusting all we endeavor to create and hope to become will be and already is in God's time. Lauralee's story of spiritual reformation begins when the platform on which she built her life fractured beneath her. She takes us on a journey to the desert, a pustinique, and a Benedictine monastery where she realizes she's being reformed by something much bigger than the faith she had known. It was 2 minutes and 52 seconds into our interview when I realized I would never have the ability to adequately describe the beauty of Lauralee's story. But that's why Platform to Table tells stories to begin with. Stories are sacramental. Their beauty will change you when you behold them, and it's that beauty that gives sight to the eye of the beholder. Lauralee Farrer has been making films professionally for over 30 years. As president and principal filmmaker of Burning Heart Productions, she began her own film work with Laundry in Tosca, an award-winning documentary that prompted an adjacent career in public speaking. The feature-length documentary that followed, The Fair Trade, was chosen as launch film for Film Baby Ryko and Warner series Power Films. Farrer was co-writer and director on the feature narrative Not That Funny, starring Emmy Award-winning Tony Hale, and writer and director on the narrative feature Praying the Hours in 2021. Each film was welcomed into multiple festivals where they all won awards, including Best Feature and Audience Favorite honors. Events with film screenings and Farrer's public speaking were presented in the years following at film festivals, conferences, colleges, churches, and more. Her current work, The Wise Woman Project, consists of twin features on the role of the female elder in contemporary Western life. Lauralee was the founding director and chief storyteller of Fuller Studio and Magazine from 2015 to 2020. She conceived and directed over 3,000 original video, podcast, and text assets, including an original video series featuring directors Martin Scorsese, Paul Schrader, David Lowery, Elliot Roche, Pete Docter, and Scott Derrickson. Cultural influencers such as Krista Tippett, Rowan Williams, David Brooks, Father Greg Boyle, and Walter Bergerman, and more. Much of the material from which her directing and screenwriting emerges comes from Farrer's seminal freelance work for humanitarian organizations. This work took her to Spain when Franco died, to Kenya during the droughts of 1981 and 1991, to Somalia when the war broke out, and to Uganda to write about early outbreaks of AIDS and the plight of its orphans. She wrote of the Sisters of Charity in Ethiopia and was in Moscow when the 1991 coup took place. She was in East Germany before and after the wall went down, in Mexico City to write about cultures of poverty, and in the U.S. cities to write about American life. She lived in a Benedictine community in Denver, Colorado for 3 years, a providential experience that formed much of the basis of her book, Praying the Hours in Ordinary Life, and feature film, Praying the Hours. Farrer was born in Hollywood, California, and resides in Southern California, where she was when we spoke. I'm Sarah Carrera DeFucia, and this is Platform to Table, where stories of spiritual reformation in the wake of crisis, trauma, and deconstruction are shared to encourage others on a journey of discovery of God's unconditional love. Welcome, Lauralee. We are so grateful and honored to have you as a master storyteller on our podcast today to share your story. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Really happy to have you. I normally start with a question about legacy, just like an introduction to your story, what listeners might discover as we're hearing your story. But instead, I wanted to read a quote that I found in your Praying the Hours in the Ordinary Life book. Mm-hmm. This is a book that, as you know, my husband has used with his friends on different retreats. And I had the honor of being at the Fuller Seminary retreat with the seminarians there. And you guys were using this book to pray the hours. And this book is such an awesome resource. But in your introduction, as you know, you shared this quote. As with all testimonies to something too big for a single imagination, each generation, each individual story brings a new contribution. If God is bigger than we are, and God is, and if each of us bears some small, complete spark of his divine image as we do, then perhaps it is because our stories are inadequate that they must all be told. An eternity will be necessary to learn in detail each of the aspects we have to describe of God. But what if, by gathering those stories, one might hope to form, little by little, a vision of the one who is otherwise beyond our imagination? What glory that would be to listen with leisure to God's story in all its infinite metamorphoses. That is beautiful. I would love to hear you talk more about the heart behind that quote, maybe your intent behind that quote, but also I want to know, what does your story tell us about God? What are we going to encounter today?
Well, that's a loaded question, as you know.
Yeah.
Hearing that read is a kind of surreal experience for me. For one thing, I hear it as if it was spoken by somebody else. And, it was spoken by somebody else, but as if it was written by someone else. And in its core truth, it was written by someone else. It was written by the person I was when I wrote it. It was written by the person who went through it the years before the writing took place. It was written by the me that is listening to it now and thinks, wow, okay, I wrote that, I don't even recognize it. And it was written by the Spirit in an all-encompassing way. It was written by the Spirit that guards and protects the story of God, or the image of God in which we are all made. So when I hear it, it inspires me to hear the part that I know I didn't write. I have said before to people who ask me about filmmaking, which is super expensive and difficult, and I fight a nickel for every time that I thought, why didn't I choose something that wasn't so expensive to do? I'd have enough money to make my next film. But when people ask me, well, you're going into production, you must really love it, you must be really excited. And the answer is really almost sour, like, yeah, I don't like any of it. I hate writing. Production is really hard. It's all expensive and super stressful. And so then the question has come up, even though I'm not usually quite that frank about it. Then why do you do it? And that is kind of encompassed by the experience of standing in a theater that is full of people who are watching a film that I made. And I know that there's not a frame up there that I was not completely involved in. Everything from the set decoration, the writing, the set deck, the direction of the actors, the frame itself, all of it. So I couldn't have been more involved than I was. And yet something is happening to the audience that I know I had nothing to do with. That's the experience. That's the transcendent experience, that it feels like, yeah, that's what I'm in it for. And the rest of it feels like a slog. It just all feels like, this is hard. And why do I have to do this? I'm trying to give language to how it feels on a daily basis to face the stuff that's difficult to do. So back to the idea of the story and what I hope that people will know about God from my story. There are many ways that I would
maybe
go. You go.
I want to hear I want to hear your initial unction. Like, I want you to carry on and tell us what you're about to say. I also want to know, what does your story tell you about God? And maybe somewhere in the middle, we each hear something different, and it becomes a beautiful symphony. It becomes a beautiful song,
Yeah. Well adjusted. That's a good, that's an easier question for me to look at. It just feels presumptuous for me to imagine saying to you, Sarah, this is right. I can't even finish the sentence. Yeah. Sarah, this is what I hope you get out of looking at a retrospective of my life. Okay, so what I know is that his ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. And that what we bring is so short of the glory of God. Even our best efforts is so short of the glory of God that we bring all that we have screwed up and all that we have all our intentional sins. I mean, the very worst and the very best of our angels. And we put all of that on a table, and we say, I can't do it. I can't live up to the image of God that you put in me. I cannot do it. And I believe that God's answer is, I was going to say, hold my beer, but that God's answer is, hold my wine? No, too far. Watch me work. Watch me work. Yeah. I don't need to turn what I have done into something more glorious than it is in order to feel like God is honored by it. God does that. God takes everything that I bring, inadequate as it all is, and says, watch me work. So this makes me feel a little emotional, but it shows us how great he is in the way, and it makes us feel small in the way the Grand Canyon makes you feel small. You don't go to the Grand Canyon and think, well, now I'm humiliated. I don't know, maybe some people do. Yeah. You go to the Grand Canyon and you think,
that's such a good
point. It's so great. And I am so small. And right now this feels so good. I feel safe and I feel so inspired, and I want to just keep coming back to this over and over and over again. And that is, if I may digress for a second, that is embedded in all of us, no matter what your religious faith, and you learn that if you are at the ocean when the sunset happens. And if you're at the ocean when the sunset happens, it is like a call goes out that is responded to in the heart of every person. Surfers, sunbathers, kids who are building sandcastles, whatever is happening at the beach, people who are in the water just to cool off, everyone stops and turns and faces as the sun goes down. Why does that happen? Because it generates that feeling that God is great and we are small. If you know that, if you can really get that through your molecules, then the fact that he did what he did, by which I mean the incarnation, becoming a person the way we are people, suffering what we suffer, so that he could take that to the cross, so that he could say we are one again, and we have nothing in between us to keep us from walking the way we walked in the garden, the way I made it to be originally. The fact that he loves us like that is so, it's just transformational, right? So that's how the transformation happens. Essentially, I guess what I'm describing is we find that we have a need for God, and we ask God to be, to become the savior of our souls. It's as simple and old-fashioned sounding as it can get, but yeah. So that's what I would say. The core thing it has done for me is to show me that he is glorious, that it is okay that I am not, and that his love for me is great. Is great.
Is great and bigger than we need to pretend to be. And
Right.
we
Takes
can
the
give
pressure
him
off.
just our small, yes. And as you were talking, I was just reminded of course, the loaves and fishes story. We can just bring the loaves and fishes to him, the small
Yes,
amount.
right.
And how I was also thinking about how nature, that description of the Grand Canyon, and how it doesn't leave you feeling humiliated in a small way, but it becomes more of an invitation to feel connected and to join him in this beauty of co-creation.
Yeah.
This role that we have as humans to co-create with him in this beauty in a right size way, where we don't need to be as big as God. We can just become vessels or ones who receive the inspiration from him as a source.
That's
what
right.
a beautiful, beautiful posture you've discovered. But also what you've described is how this is also just inherently part of our being, part of our natural creation and surroundings, like how we naturally turn and face the sun as the sun is setting. That is woven throughout your work, the Liturgy of the Hours, and your story about how you just naturally, the words that you use, stuttered upon praying the hours as a part of your journey, and particularly in a time of great transition. But where did this all began? As you were a child, were you raised to be reverent, to be open, to see God in all things, and to be formed in that way? Like, what was your spiritual upbringing like?
So, probably the greatest gift that I was born into is the faith of my parents. And on both sides of their family, the faith of their parents. So I come from a long line of people who are deep believers in Christianity. Excuse me. I made a conscious decision to give my entire life over. Well, first of all, I became a Christian in the way that we used to describe that, by going up front at church and getting down on my knees and asking Jesus into my heart at a Sunday night service at the church that I grew up in when I was 4. And my mother said she saw me get up from the pew and walk out and then walk up the aisle to the front. And of course the pastor knew who I was, and he watched me coming, and he had enough sense to know that this might be a serious thing. And this was, I guess, a season he was doing of altar call related sermons that he did for, let's say, 4 or 5 weeks, something like that. And I went forward every time. And in my little 4-year-old mind, I did it because I thought I wanted to make it really clear that I meant this, And I was 11 whenever I saw that there was a difference between sort of putting yourself in the flow of being a Christian, going to church and believing in Jesus and having Jesus in your heart, as I, would have said it when I was 4. And there's a difference between that and devoting your whole life to whatever God has for you to do. So I was 11 when that happened, and it was real. It was real. It was a turning point for me. So yes, I grew up in a home where I had all the language for that. I had the reference for it, and I had people, including my beloved mother and father at hand, to whom I could say, well, what does this mean, and why does that happen? And that immediately took its shape in the form of, I was a musician, and so I did a lot of songwriting. I was a big Joni Mitchell, acolyte in that era.
Wow.
Everybody was, who had any sense. And so I did a lot of songwriting and leading worship in church and that kind of thing. But really, the beginning of my clarity of the path and my devotion to it was in those two events, when I was 4 and then when I was 11.
And
That's
you
a long
mentioned
time ago,
that
sister.
there's a difference. Well, and that's why we're here. We're going to talk about the journey in between. The journey, I think you've kind of referenced, where you said there's a difference between making that decision and then maybe later in life, I think is what you're referring to, where our faith becomes tested, it becomes matured, and begins to evolve or maybe reform in a way where it becomes our own. Yeah. Where did that journey begin for you? For most of our listeners, that journey begins for us when we hit some sort of crisis and we begin to really unpack who we are, who we think God is, what is our work in this world, and is it actually what we want to do? What, who am I? Yeah. And what has God given me the purpose to achieve? So is that what you were referring to when you were telling us the story about when you were 7 and 11, is maybe that time in your life where there was a time of testing or crisis, or is that where that begins? I
think it's natural, first of all, for when people are in transition, which happens at several times in the course of our lives, where it takes on whatever shape, but maybe it's prompted by tragedy. Maybe it's just prompted by an internal turmoil, but whatever it's prompted by, it is natural that people go through this physically, they go through it socially, they go through it in their family dynamics, and naturally that we go through it spiritually as well. So there were probably many times between 11 years old and 30-something that I went through these sort of roiling, I know there were many of them, these roiling transitions. Yeah. But one of them that precipitated my discovery of Praying the Hours was when my 20-year marriage was, I'm going to be a little bit careful here, just because now I'm entering a place where I'm telling a story that is not just mine, it also belongs to other people, and it's not mine to tell their story. It is mine to only tell mine. So I don't want to sound like I'm being evasive, and if I do, it's because I'm being careful about my language around that. I didn't know it at the time, but my 20-year marriage was coming to an end, and I did not think that was possible. When I got into this marriage, I was in it for life. And anyone who knew me would have said, yep, if anybody can do it, Lauralee can. I mean, those things come back to haunt me now, of course. But it really reckons back to my answer to your question of what would you say that you have learned from your own stories about God? And here is a prime example of that. I was determined, even though I knew a year into my marriage that I had made the wrong decision. I had made an immature decision. And that looked like this. Hold on, cliffhanger.
Yeah, cliffhanger.
It's 111 here, so it's a little bit hot.
bless you for doing this in the heat.
Look how pink I'm turning. Okay.
Oh my goodness.
I lost my train of thought. That's how quick it goes when you're 67.
You were saying when it hit with your marriage, when you were thinking about your concept of God and like what your story says about God.
So I had what I would call a dogged determination 1 year in when I realized that I had made a mistake. And I was 19 when I got married. I had just returned from living in Heidelberg where I was in college. It just was a really immature decision, marked by, as so many immature decisions are, me saying yes when I was in doubt instead of saying no. I just didn't see that it was possible for me to say no. Feelings would be hurt, plans would be, I just didn't have it in me to do that at the time. But it was the wrong decision. I shouldn't have made it. I did. A year in, I knew it was the wrong decision, but I was doggedly determined that I was going to stay in it. I couldn't be the only person who came to a marriage that, wasn't a great fit. I'm going to tough it out. And I remember saying to God, no matter if I never feel you in this relationship for the rest of my life, I will be loyal to it. I'll be faithful to it for your sake, for the sake of the gospel. And I did not know at the time that was not what God wanted from me. I didn't know at the time that what I was doing was I was putting myself on a pedestal of self-righteousness. And I look back on that young woman and I feel forgiving and I feel sorry for her, and she was trying so hard, but really it was all about my strength and me saying, I will do this no matter what. And believe you me, no matter what came at me for the next 20 years. And when I finally left that marriage, it was after this experience that prompted the book, Praying the Hours in Ordinary Life, because I saw the pillar that I was up on top of, that I had built myself. I saw it crumbling. And I didn't think it was possible for that to happen. And I didn't know what was going to happen to me when it did. My life felt like it just fractured underneath me, and I fell through into something totally different. And I might add, God was there when I was on the pillar. He was there when the pillar was falling apart. He was there when the ground fractured, and he was there when I fell through. So that was also confusing to me, because I kind of expected that if I found myself in darkness, or if God was silent, or if I found myself making choices that I knew were wrong, that I would know that by the absence of the presence of God. And that never happened. One time I remember being in a church service, and I was so agitated. It was during this same season. I was so agitated that I got up, and as I was leaving the service, I thought, first of all, I was the kind of person in a church that I was always in leadership. I was always up in front. So people see me leaving in some agitated way, it's going to be a little bit of a thing, right? I leave the church, I go to the ladies' restroom, I lock myself into the restroom. I can still see what that looks like right now. And I say out loud, I don't believe anymore. I don't believe.
Wow.
And just as clearly as I ever before had heard the voice of the Spirit or sense, I was given permission not to believe. I was told that is okay. You not believing has no impact on whether I am or not. And of course, my analytical brain just went, okay, wait a minute, who's telling me that right now? Like, what just happened? But really, it kind of, the whole thing dissolved under me. And as I say, God, in the form of the Father or the Son or the Holy Spirit, that God was with me through the whole thing. So I don't even remember what question I'm answering
so
now.
now that you...
So lost. I'm on such
it's a beautiful story.
road.
No. I'm so glad that you illustrated that, because what you're describing is very much the platform to table experience that many of us have been on, where we have built this persona of ourselves on a platform out of self-righteousness, out of conditions that maybe have been imposed upon us by our denominational contexts, or just who we were told God is. And who we believed we had to be,
And the capacity that we
had
at the time.
But it sounds like...
Did I have the capacity when I was 4
the capacity.
and I made that decision? Or when I was 11, you know? Yeah, so it's natural. And we need to just lighten up on ourselves a little bit, right? Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, and the fact that our brain, the prefrontal cortex of our brain where we make decisions, isn't even formed until we're 25. So
right.
Take it easy on ourselves. But knowing what you do now, and having gone through this experience, looking back at that young girl in the bathroom who said, "I don't believe," what was she saying I don't believe in? And why did God give permission for that process? Because I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I want to hear what you have to say, because,
I'm really intrigued by how you would answer that. I mean, I won't make you. This is your podcast. But what did I mean? I don't know. I don't know what I meant. Go ahead.
If you want me to say, I'll say.
Okay, do it.
For me, at that point in my journey, and I do love that the podcast is also a time where we can connect. And so I'm happy to share this part of my story as well. For me, I think I came to a place where it wasn't necessarily that I don't believe in God, and maybe I'm only able to articulate this now looking back, like maybe you are, but I don't believe in the God that I know to be true somewhere in my heart, or maybe in the heart of the child who first encountered him in such a pure way. But this God that has been constructed is so out of sync with some wise part of myself that says something different. So there is a God of my misunderstanding somehow that I have to let go of in order to somehow get a hold of a much bigger, deeper, higher vision of God. Because what I have now in this context is too small for me. It's too small for the being that I'm creating. Too small for me, too small for the world around me, for the person. I was just like, I felt like I was bursting at the seams. And also, you stay in that place, it becomes almost harmful to yourself. So I don't know.
And to others.
That's what it meant for me.
Yeah, when the aforementioned pedestal came crashing down, people were hurt by it, which is still a chagrin to me. It's still painful to me to think about that. Even though I have made amends and all the things that I think you're supposed to do, it had the natural result that self-righteousness always has, which is that it falls monumentally short, right? Looking back, if I were to sort of interpret it psychologically, maybe I would say that I was, as you just implied, that I had reached a stage where I was old enough to be able to entertain a God who was bigger than the one I had embedded in my mind. I'll tell you the phrase that came to my mind whenever you said, what did you think you were giving up?
Okay.
In my mind,
Yeah.
I knew it was all of it. It was all of it.
Okay.
It
all
was,
of it.
Yeah, it was all of it. And it meant the risk was huge. It felt to me, it felt like deciding to commit suicide or something. I mean, I knew the fallout would be great. I knew that the pain I would cause my parents would be great. I did not know. It would be like becoming unmoored from the dock, and now I am out, without, recourse or compass or anything, out in the open sea. And I feared all of those things, but I thought I am ready for that because I care more about the truth. That's what was happening inside, is it felt like there was this cognitive dissonance between what I was starting to experience and how that argued with the absolute sureties that I had about God in my mind. So now what am I going to do? And I think what happened was it was really my shift from saying that I worshiped a God. I'm thinking of the play and the movie Equus. I worshiped a God that was too small for my worship. I was getting too big for it. And I was worshiping a God that was too small, which is what happens whenever people give themselves to all kinds of things that are too small for their need to worship. It's going to collapse, and it is going to, there's going to be carnage, But in the same moment, what it was as if it was a door opening to how big God really is. And I felt God was gentle with me because I was in such turmoil. It was me. I could still even kind of feel it as I'm talking about it right now, which is why I tell the story of it instead of describe it, analytically.
Yeah.
It was me saying, I don't believe in any of my dearest, most important, my dearest held, most important beliefs. I don't believe in any of that anymore. And now I'm Major Tom out here in the cosmos, unhooked from the satellite, and it's over in a second. It was a good life while it lasted, but it's ended in a pretty dark space. And instead, that was like a door opening to the relief of having to keep me having to keep the earth spinning on its axis. All of what I felt that I didn't even realize I was doing this. Once again, the young mind, right? All of what I thought I had to keep going and defending when people had questions, defending when I had questions. I didn't have to do any of that. And God didn't want it. So.
Wow. So it sounds like there was a part of you that became much more open, and then a new path, a new way opened before you, that you were also willing to follow, to find this whatever was on the other side. Is that when the praying the hours in the ordinary life story began, when you took the 50-day journey and all of that?
It was somewhere in there. I'm really bad at timelines, to be honest. And let me also just correct a little something. When you said, is that whenever you were willing to embrace, that really is putting a polish on it. It's really more like in the scriptures when Jesus says to the disciples, who do you say that I am? Would you also, essentially what he says is, would you also leave me? And the disciples' answer is, to whom would we go? And the way I hear that is not like some triumphant comment, but them saying, are you kidding?
Right.
Seeing what we've seen, knowing what we've known, we are wrecked from here out. That's what it felt like. We are wrecked from here.
Yeah.
So to whom would we go?
Yeah.
You're the Messiah. We know that. We can't unknow it. So that's what that season felt like to me. Like I said, the ground fractured underneath me, and I didn't know what I was going to fall into. As it happened, I fell into a God that was bigger than a God that was much bigger than I was. So it was still churning in me. It was obviously much bigger than the fact that I was in a marriage that I probably shouldn't have been in from the beginning and that had started to dissolve. I didn't know it was dissolving. I was still holding on, and I had this unction to take a journey, which will sound more familiar to people now that retreats and the monastic experience and things like that are much more common. But back then, not only were they not common, we didn't have language for it, and I also came from a tradition, as I have said before. The closest thing to liturgy in the traditions that I came from is lime jello at a potluck. You know what I'm saying? Like, I had never heard the word Advent before. Yes. I didn't know what Lent was. I was not schooled in the as used to be called higher church, right? So
yes.
I just thought I'm going to. Now, this story can get super complicated in detail, so I just want to be careful that I don't fall into it, like the deep end of a pool. But I knew that I needed to get away. I just felt like I had to get out and clear my mind. And since then I've learned that I'm an introvert and that I understand more about myself and my needs in that way. But I also think, if I can associate myself with some of the greats of the faith, I did essentially what Benedict did and what Francis did and what so many others do, which is they get out of the noise of the city, they get by themselves somewhere in the desert, whatever shape that desert takes, In my case, it happened to be the desert. And they get away where there is no impediment to them hearing the voice of God in whatever form that happens to take. And that's what I did. And that was a journey that took 50 days, actually. And I was, burnt by the sun. I mean, when I returned, this is a really simple thing to say about it. And it is so inconsequential that it's embarrassing almost to bring it up. But I'll say it anyway because it's just evidence of what that time was like. I came back 40 days later, 30 pounds lighter. Like I was,
wow.
I looked different. I thought different. I was really essentially like, if, how they say that on a molecular level that you completely refurbish your body every 7 years or whatever. Well, it's like all that happened in that one crazy 50 days for me. And that's when I discovered Praying the Hours.
There's a quote you have in your book that says, you were in a season where my own grief, you said, a season when my own were filled with grief, and I longed for the solace of a landscape to match my sorrow. A brief dream of a woman shading her eyes from the sun was enough to drive me desertward. Wow. Do you want to say any more about that?
So you have plucked a little story, one of the stories that I was saying. There's so many here that they kind of come back at me, in a fire hose. But so to pull out that one, I remember sitting on the back porch at my home. I remember trying to explain to my husband that I needed to go away, and I didn't know what that meant. That all I knew was that I needed to go and that I needed to not take anything with me. No food, no money. I knew I wanted to take our old car, and I was just going to head somewhere, I didn't know where. And all of this greatly disturbed him, which is easy to imagine. It didn't disturb me because I was in so much turmoil already that it just, all that sounded like I'm choosing to live. So it was better than where I was at all the time anyway. But as I really focused to try to think, where am I going? This image came to my mind of a woman standing in the desert, tall, dark hair, and shielding her eyes like this to the sun. And I thought, okay, then it's the desert. So that makes sense, right? So I headed toward Phoenix. And when I got to Phoenix, I spent the night with a friend there, a woman that I would now consider a wise woman who lives on the edge of the village and prays for the village. And I started my journey with her praying for me, and then I thought, well, I don't know where to go. And the breadcrumbs that I followed were so few and far between and so totally random as it would be as if you're starving and you see something on the side of the road that's edible. You don't care what it is, right? It doesn't have to match your theological underpinnings. Yeah. So I thought, well, okay, Phoenix just opened a library that is supposed to have some special architectural significance. Maybe I'll go there. So I went there and I walked in, and I was just, everywhere I was going, I was just looking for signs, looking for anything that could tell me what to do next. And I saw that in this new library, there was a wall, probably of granite or some kind of stone, and into it there were carved phrases of inspirational quotes, the largest of which was Georgia O'Keeffe. Naturally, she's a patron saint of that whole area, right? So I saw that her name was misspelled, like literally in stone. And I thought, I have to be wrong about that. That can't be true. And I thought, what would, it just totally flummoxed me. So I thought, well, I'm in a library. So I'm just going to go upstairs. I'm going to find books by George O'Keeffe, and I'm going to see that you can't be wrong everywhere. I have to be wrong, It doesn't escape me that this is a mimic of my journey with God at the moment. Anyway, I find the Georgia O'Keeffe section in the library, which was large, and I walk in and I pull out this one huge art book, Georgia O'Keeffe, and BT Dubs. They had spelled it wrong. So before I left, I went to the librarian and I said, you know that? And she said, yeah. Now, did I make all that up? Did that actually happen? I still can't believe that actually happened, but whatever. It was peripheral to the story. When I opened this big art book, I opened to a large black and white photo of Georgia O'Keeffe standing in the desert, holding her hand like this and blocking the sun. And instead of feeling what any normal person would feel, which is, oh my God, that's the photo, I'm freaking out right now, I did not feel that. Yeah. I felt more like I opened it, I saw it, and I thought, noted. And I read where it was taken, and then that's where I headed. It felt like that. It felt like, got it.
Wow.
And I still didn't know how long.
Yes.
So I remember getting in the elevator to go downstairs and to report to the librarian from my perspective that they had misspelled Georgia O'Keeffe's name. And when I was in this elevator, there were two women that I would have thought of as like society women. And one of them was telling the other her woes about having something redone at her home, rebuilt. And she was talking about frustrations with her contractor. It was all, just noise behind me. But one of the women, the other woman said, how long did he say it's going to take? And the first woman who was having the work done said, he said it's going to take another 40 days. And it was like those words suddenly took shape in gold and hung in the air and hummed for a second and then dissolved and fell to the ground. Like all I heard was, it's going to take another 40 days. And something inside of me said, of course. So I'm headed for Ghost Ranch for 40 days, whatever that means. And then it took 1,000 turns from there. One of which and
somewhere along the way, go ahead.
It's worth mentioning because I imagine this is where we're going to go. I was in Taos. I had gone to this was before cell phones, so I had gone to a phone booth. And in the phone booth, in some form, I don't remember because I don't have a visual image of it in my mind, there was a note from a woman. No, I didn't know it was a woman. A note from somebody saying something about if you need prayer or, like I said, I don't remember anything about it. I just know that there was something said that I read and thought, oh, that's why I'm here. That's the note for me. And it had a telephone number. So I called her. And it was a woman who answered the phone. And she heard a little bit of my story, and she said, why don't you come and see me? Now, this was in Estes Park, Colorado, and I was in Taos, New Mexico. But it was the same kind of experience where I thought, oh, okay, noted, this is the next place to go. So I got in the car and I headed for her. This woman was what the Russians used to call the pustanik. So back during the Tsarist era, every village had someone who lived on the edge of the forest or lived on the edge of the village and prayed for the village. That was common. And they were mostly men. The stories are mostly of men, but there were women as well. And this woman was one of those. She was a pustanik, and it means hermit, or it means desert, I think, but it's like hermit, really. So she lived in this offshoot of a place called the Madonna House, long story, started by Catherine Doherty, if there's anyone interested in learning about that. And she lived here in this house, and she had these hermitages on the mountainside where people could come to pray. And she listened to my story, and basically she said, okay, follow me. And she took me out to one of these, it's like a one-room, very, very basic cabin. And in it was a Bible, a little jar of salt, a loaf of bread, and a jug of water. And that was it. That's what you had to subsist on, and you were there to pray. So I learned then about this idea of the wise woman, from my perspective of this woman that I met, this wise woman who lived on the edge of the forest and prayed for the village. And as a storyteller, it kind of sunk into my brain somewhere, and it because I was not quite 40 at the time, I think. And I thought someday I'll probably tell that story, or maybe it just informs my journey right now. But if you were to flash forward almost 30 years later, not only is that the story I'm trying to unpack, but I know now that I'm intrigued in it, and it lived as long as it did in me, because that is supposed to be my story. That is what I'm supposed to do in some shape that may not be obvious, that I am supposed to live on the edge of the forest and pray for the village. And the edge of the forest may be Griffith Park, and the village may be Los Angeles, for all I know. But I know that my work right now, since I'm retired from my job, that my work is to discover who the wise woman is and how do I follow in her path. So that was a story that came to me during that difficult time.
Wow. So how did that experience with her kind of set you on a trajectory of embodying the Liturgy of the Hours and kind of stuttering into them, as you called, praying them? Did that experience with her lead you to begin praying the hours, or was it after you had met her and spent that time with her?
It was, let me think. It must have been before I met her, because the way I came to that was very mundane, very plain. I was sleeping on top of my car. I was in the desert in New Mexico. This was before, let's see, that chronologically, that doesn't seem to work. well, anyway, you have to trust me that this part is true. This was before
Yes.
the Georgia O'Keeffe experience, because I was, as I said, I was out in the desert, and a 24-hour day was too painful for me to face and to imagine living through. And I remembered something about Alcoholics Anonymous saying that if you can't, to go through the day by day, and if a day was too long, hour by hour. And though I didn't have an alcohol addiction, it was something that I understood, and I thought, okay, hour by hour is what I'll do. And I fell into this rhythm of prayer, because I'd pray when I woke up in the morning, I'd pray at noon, I would pray when the sun went down, I would pray when I went to sleep. And then there were a couple of hours of prayer in between there that I would do, because I couldn't last that long. I couldn't go from when I woke up all the way to noon, or when I woke up all the way. So I just prayed at the times that it seemed intuitive for me to pray. And I prayed the things that seemed intuitive to me to pray at those hours. The same kinds of scriptures. I fell into a rhythm, scriptures that just were from my memory, I asked the Lord for the same kinds of things. You don't pray the same thing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon as you pray at 3 in the morning. Things, especially if you're out in the desert and sleeping on top of your car and you're hearing something in the desert around you, you're praying something totally different at 3 in the morning than you are at 3 in the afternoon. So I had gotten into this rhythm of prayer. And then that's when I discovered, maybe this was just after I left O'Keeffe's place, which was closed, by the way, and there was nobody there. But I had found out about this monastery in Abiquiu that was nearby. And I didn't know that monasteries still existed. I didn't know hermits still existed. The whole thing was a huge mystery to me. And it all just felt like, well, I guess this is what it looks like when your life fractures and you fall into the center of the earth, You find things you didn't know existed. So I drove toward, when I found out about this monastery, I went there, and I was going to ask them, can I just come inside the border of your property and stay there for a little while I'm on this journey, because then I'll feel safer there. And I had no idea that one of their vows is the vow of hospitality. So no matter the fact that here's this 39-year-old woman showing up from nowhere and asking for shelter, how contrary to their lives that looked, they had to say yes, and they had a room that they allowed me to stay in. It was like, no, you're not going to sleep on top of your car, which I sort of preferred, but whatever. So they offered me this room. I found out that there was a chapel, and I thought, oh, I know what I'll do. Like, I'm making this up all on my own. I know what I'll do. I'll go to the chapel when it's these times of prayer that I have fallen into. And wouldn't you know it, they were there every time. And I came to the conclusion that that's what they do. They pray in this chapel 24/7. Well, no, that's not what they do. It's that they go there for the hours of prayer. And I was praying the hours. I just didn't know it. And even then, I still didn't feel like, gosh, this is trippy, what is happening to me. It wasn't until later that I thought, holy cow, this is trippy. At the time, I thought, just like that, okay, I get it, I'm listening.
Yeah.
This is how it happened. This is how it happened to Benedict. It's what he discovered. He just brought it to the surface. What happened to Francis. This is what happens to all these guys. They come here, they pray. And they prayed the very same prayers that I prayed during those times. Not like exactly word for word, but the same spirit of it, which is ultimately what gave me the idea that if this is embedded in everybody, which I started to feel like it was, and it certainly is embedded in nature, what if I just write the story of a 24-hour day and I personify each one of those hours of prayer according to the characteristics that I have come to see that they have, and then I just tell the story of that 24 hours. Let's see if people can recognize it, if people will feel like, I don't know, there's something about that, but yeah, I resonate with that totally. So that's what I did in the book, and I also did that in the film I made of that's called Praying the Hours. So.
Yeah, you did such a beautiful job in the book talking about how it is so naturally woven, and we shouldn't think it's strange that we are kind of called to do this as part of it, because it is embedded in our own human nature. And just as the Desert Fathers naturally fell into it, it makes total sense that you would have just naturally fallen into it, particularly at a season in your life that was so fractured, because it does give you form for this new spiritual reformation, for a new becoming of who you were about to be.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. This is the grid.
I love
That's
in your
what
book.
It felt like this is the new grid. Like I don't know. I've fallen like the Matrix or something. You know, I have fallen out of the old man-made grid, which is Chronos time, and into the ancient core Earth. Yeah, the natural time, the time that my body tells me it is.
Yeah. Well, you brought up Chronos time, and how you talk about in your book and the film that time is not money to be. Is that what you say? Money to be wasted, or
right?
Time?
Well, we talk about time.
Time is not money.
Time is not money.
Yes.
We talk about spending it, wasting it,
and
buying it. You know, you can't buy time, and it isn't any of that. That's all incremental. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's just beautiful how you acknowledge more of like a sacramental way of living, and how we are much more close to the supernatural in the world that we're inhabiting. But we have, even with time, we can control and fabricate and create worlds that really leave no room for the grandeur of God or the becoming of who we truly are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the key characteristics of that for me is that the time, and I just try to delineate it by identifying Chronos time and Kairos time. I know that there are some different descriptors of what those two mean. But in one, it's incremental. And as soon as you're born, you start losing minutes, seconds, hours, like you're running out of time. The difference between that and the time that I'm talking about is that it's filled with grace. It's the idea that every instant is filled with the whole grandeur of God. All that there is in every instant. And what that means is each moment that you enter is brand new, and all things are possible. Instead of bearing the weight of all you've done with those wasted moments in the face of what little is left. That's a crushing way to go through life. Instead of thinking that every new moment is suffused with grace. It is all brand new. It's not so much that it's brand new. It's not like Groundhog Day or something where you totally reset and you can't remember anything. It's new in its possibility. It's new in its fullness of grace. And this is what I meant earlier whenever I said it is about the glory of God and not about our righteousness. Chronos time totally resonates with self-righteousness. And it's why any aware, thinking person is going to come to a place when it shatters under them. But Kairos time, it is infused with the presence of Jesus. It is infused with all of the possibility of who God is. And every new moment we enter is, like I said, it is completely, totally absorbed with grace. That is how we can be hopeful in this life. That is how we can live in faith, because of that.
Yeah, I think, is this what you're touching on, that even with time being so infused with grace, we're even then able to view the time of the past with grace, and we're able to expect that God will weave the mistakes of the past, the places where we've fallen short, the places where our prefrontal cortex wasn't developed, and weaving that all into the present and the future narrative of grace in our story, where it all becomes one beautiful creation graced by Him, where we don't cling as tightly to what is right, what is wrong, what was bad, what was, you know what I'm trying to say?
Okay, like, you're blowing my mind right now.
It all becomes part.
You're blowing my mind right now, because that thought is not one that has really occurred to me. I feel like I've evolved just enough to look back on my younger self with a certain amount of my grace and say she was young and she did her very best. In the same way that when I get to be 80, if God extends life that long, I'm going to look back at me at 67 and say, oh, she did her best. Isn't she sweet? But so wrong. But what you're saying is that, of course, all of it is redeemed, because God is outside of that, of the kind of chronos time that keeps our past stuck back there, you know, before we knew. Well, we're always someplace that is before we knew. So yeah, I think you must be right about that. That is a really amazing idea, Sarah. You should write a book about that.
And maybe that, well, I don't know about that. Just like you, I have feelings about writing. And maybe we're already somewhere that is eternal. You know,
yeah, that I believe.
Ourselves and
that is part of the.
So
I have it on the movie poster that is hanging on the wall right next to me right now, that says eternity is not something that happens to you after you die. I think we all intuitively believe that it's not like this chronos thing where we go along in our lives and then suddenly we die and we enter eternity. But then we all kind of assume that that's the way it works, you know. And I don't think it works that way. I think it is, when my life fractured, I feel like I fell into something that is much more like the descriptor of eternity than the descriptor of, I mean, I came back from that experience having to remind myself what April is, having to remember when somebody says April 14, that has meaning, and that this is the way we have chosen to live together, so we can show up at the same office in the morning at the same time, you know. But there isn't anything natural about it. Yeah. It's just functional. It's just functional. So.
So, you mentioned the work that you're working on now, and in Search of the Wise Woman and its twin, back when light began its journey towards us. And as you're talking about this idea of eternity, like living in the now, but also the not yet, as an artist, how do you grapple with, and you also mentioned in like what you'll be exploring in your work in Search of the Wise Woman, how do you grapple with being a woman who has been marked by grief and loss, maybe some sense of being set apart in the world to maybe pray or speak of stories or to create in a way that maybe others can't see? How do you grapple with that calling and also hold that intention with this idea that we're also living in there's a part of us that needs to hang on to, or is a part of us that is living in eternity, that where the work will be complete or healed or fully seen or made known. As an artist, do you find that space is a place you're called to continually just go back to finding and discovering God as your source of strength and stability in those times? I mean, that's a tension to hold.
Yeah,
I don't know if you know. I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
No, you are. Well, it's clear to me. It's not a pleasant answer. My mother had the gift of intercessory prayer, and there was a point at which I realized, the way she intercedes, because she would often feel even the physical suffering that somebody she was praying for, even that happened, but she would suffer with the people that she prayed for. It was quite remarkable. She would pray. She prayed 8 hours a day. It was definitely a gift, because you just don't do that, you know, out of your own strength. I came to see that what I was called to do was like what she was called to do, though not the same, in the sense that as an artist, I was an intercessor. And I've written about this and spoken about it sometimes, where by nature, I hate tension. I hate it. And I know some people do and some people don't. It's inconceivable to me that there are people who love the kind of tension that comes from arguing out their philosophies or their political views or whatever. And I just, listen, I watch Great British Baking Show, and when it comes to the time whenever they say who won, I want to hear that, but I have my finger on a mouse, because when they say who didn't win, I can't stand to see their face. So I click away before that happens, and I don't watch any more of it. Now,
no kidding.
That's really honest to God truth. So I hate tension.
That's sweet.
But all of storytelling is about tension. All of it is. And if you can't abide it, then you can't tell a story. And something like that is true about living a life. Now, we all struggle to get out of tension. We all want to we don't want to choose suffering. You know, I feel like I'm rewriting Paul here in my mind, but do I choose to be in tension or to suffer even more so that I can feel the grace of God even more that way? No, of course not. But it comes all by itself. You know, life brings it by itself.
Yeah.
So I think as artists, what we do is there's a scripture that says, or that talks about this arc of suffering producing perseverance, and perseverance producing character, and character producing hope. And these are not for like characteristics that are unrelated to each other. It's a path. It's instructions. And I think as an artist who's called to intercession, we are called to have one foot in suffering and the other foot in hope, so that people can cross over the bridge of us. They can cross over the bridge of our stories. And as an artist, that means you have to be willing to stay in the suffering and not just get away from it, or, not just get away from it as fast as you possibly can, which is, of course, the instinct. But if you don't stay there, I don't know, it's like the person the fireman is going back into the fire to help someone escape that can't escape. What bridge are people going to cross over if your stories are not there to tell them how? So liking the tension or not liking the tension, the stories get stronger the more tension I allow there to be in them. And I don't like it there, but that's just what it's made of. So either do it or, get out of the kitchen. I'm trying to bring it back around. So it's just not going to happen.
Oh, you can always bring it back to baking with me. I love baking, but so living in tension and saying yes to that as a storyteller, that calling is one thing. Tell me just a little bit about your journey or your daily conviction and commitment to telling the story honestly, where maybe there is no answer if you're living
Yeah.
in tension, or there isn't going to be a polished sheen on it at the end,
Right.
or when you tell the
tension
story.
right there.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that all your stories have no endings, but it. We grappled well, I think, earlier when we were not on the phone yet or on the call yet, about the idea of telling stories and how do I want it to affect people. And I'm of the mind that a story is not a pack horse. You can't load it up with all of your ideas and send it off and hope that other people unpack it and take those things away. And yet it's more like, I use this example of at a film festival that I was at, and I was on a panel, and we were asked this question. I mean, it's such an impossible question, but anyway, each person on the panel was asked, if you could give one word that explains the most important thing to your work, what would that word be? And I just, my whole insides just, twisted in a knot, and I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? I thought about, do I say God? But believe me, the community that was there, they just didn't have a reference for that word that didn't come without
right.
spitting, So
right.
I thought, okay, well, I'm going to give a name for God. I'm going to say love, because it is the name for God, not just a characteristic, but a name that God says, I am this. So whenever it came to me, I said, without overweighting it, I really have to say it has to be love. And unlike as I just mentioned, a pack horse, what I said then is what I feel now. It's like your film is this little canoe, and you fill it with love, and you push it off into the river, and you hope that it gets to the other side. And if it gets to the other side, and someone finds it, and they find love, and they feel you from over there. Hello, I got it. I feel your love. Then the film it's done its job. It's over. It's not any more important than the canoe is. So I don't know. I look at it like that. I think we have to stay in the tension. We have to be willing to let that continue to exist in our stories and in our lives, and stop trying to answer everything so much. It's not as valuable as you think it might be. What are we asked to do? After Christ, there are 2 commandments: to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. 2, and they're both to love. So I feel like we need to say to ourselves, once we are doing that, let's talk about the smaller goals.
Wow, I think that's beautiful. And speaking to the leaders who may be pastors on our podcast and preparing sermons to share, wow, what a challenge it is to find the space within you and within your theological context, denominational context. Like, how can I hold that tension? How can I not have to answer every question with the sermons that I share? How can I love and also create space for God to love through the words that I'm sharing in the church and between people? So I think that directly applies as well.
Yeah. I think we would do better if we stopped. Sorry. I think we would do better if we stopped trying to answer and started and spent more time strengthening people in the faith and in the word, so that they can answer for themselves their unique circumstances. So it's a little bit like the old adage about you can fish and give somebody a fish, or you can teach them to fish. Right. Too much in our churches, I think what we do is we give people fish and not enough of it, instead of teaching them how to fish for themselves I mean, the whole idea is relationship with God. So that's what we should be helping people understand how to pursue and sustain. And yeah. All right, I interrupted you.
To
you were
go on a journey, like you did. No. That was a perfect way to just explain that and illustrate that. And I agree. Creating space for other people's journey and to just sojourn with them, I think is a beautiful thing for a pastor to consider. So you said in your writing about your film that you are working on, and can you just tell us a little bit about, in your words, the what the films are that you're working on now? I know it's a twin production. Are you just working on one or both right now? And then I'll kind of ask some questions from there.
Okay. I am working on both of them at the same time. I started a narrative based on this loose idea that a narrative, by which I mean a nonfiction story, that is based on this loose idea that what if we lost by not having these pustaniks that live on the edge of the village and pray for the village? Do they exist somewhere in some way that we're unaware of? And what would it look like if the forest was Griffith Park and the village was Los Angeles? So I started just to imagine Griffith Park with this woman living in it, and let the story start to tell itself by doing that. Now, that sounds super mysterious, whatever. I'm 67 years old. I've been doing this for a really long time. I know my way of accessing story and presenting myself to it, and letting it happen. I think I'm remembering way back, Johnny Carson asked Neil Simon, "Do you write like by inspiration or is it discipline?" And Neil Simon said, "Oh, inspiration, absolutely inspiration." He said, "Fortunately, it comes every morning at 9:00. So it's sort of like that. I've lived long enough to know that it's about discipline, and it's about inspiration for sure, but you have to put yourself in front of it and and you need to have the ears to hear it when it's happening." So I started writing that story, and I mentioned that to some friends who expressed an interest in, well, how do you even know who the wise woman is in the first place? Like, what does she look like? Because the fact is, even if she does still exist, which of course she does, she is mostly she's mostly hidden from our current society. And we'd be really interested in just the descriptors of what she looks like, So in my journey of trying to figure out how to write about this character, I also started to write about how was I trying to find her. And when I did that, those two things, they were like unrelated points that suddenly moved into location with each other and kind of snapped to grid. And what it showed me was these 2 points of discovering this woman, writing about her, are really the road to me becoming that person. And when I saw that, I thought, oh, it's sort of like I have the privilege right now of, was it Kierkegaard who said purity of heart is to will one thing? I have the privilege of willing one thing right now, and that is this journey. And when I realized that this is leading me and teaching me along the way to being this woman that I'm writing about, that was very sobering to me. I had all kinds of different emotional reactions, partly like, I don't want to do that, to I am so not, because I see it for what it is now than I ever have before, and I am not ready. It's like it's something you don't mess around with unless God calls you to it. And I just felt like this blows my mind that I've been led all the way here, only to realize that, so little sister, This is the way the Spirit speaks to me, by the way. She has a female voice at this point. She says, all right, little sister, I know this is surprising to you, but this is not only what you're going to write about, this is where you're going. This is where we're going. We're going to this. So as you're writing, or you're imagining that you're just making up a story, or you're going to tell a film and make a film, and then it's going to be over and you're going to move on, that's kind of not how this is going. So just to prepare you so that you know what to pack. And here's what you pack. The Pustanik is called to 4 things. To intercession, to prayer, to solitude, to service, and to hospitality. Now, isn't that an interesting combination?
Wow.
Solitude and hospitality, prayer and service.
Huh.
That's an enigma to me, how to do all of those things together. I know how to do solitude. I'm good at that. And I know how to do hospitality. But having them both as goals feels like, oh, that's interesting. And concomitantly, I don't know if these 2 things are related, but they kind of feel like it in my mind. You have 4 things that you are given for this journey: salt, bread, water, and the book. The book being, of course, there is only one in that mind, which is the Bible. So the more I research about the Pustanik, the hermit, the more I feel like I think that's what I'm talking about. Yeah,
well, as you know, the Benedictine hermit is, as you know, the Benedictine hermit is called to silence, solitude, hospitality, and prayer, and the scripture. It's like all of those things. So you're like called to embody that. And it is very full circle for you.
It is. No, I didn't
where
realize
you were
that
in
about...
Estes Park, and
it's full circle for me. Estes Park just now is the first time that I've heard that is the same thing for a Benedictine monk. I didn't know that. So
I spend a lot of time in Big Sur. Yeah. So, sorry, there's a little bit of a delay, so that's why my questions are coming in later. But I spend a lot of time at New Camaldoli Hermitage in Big Sur with the monks there. And Mike and I think, as you know, lived at the Hermitage for a year with the monks, and that always was such a peculiar thing to me as well, that they are called to this kind of hospitality, but they're also called to being hermits, silence and solitude, and they have this charism of outreach and mission and service as well. And I'm like, how does this all work? So it was really cool to see all of that behind the scenes, and it's encouraging to me, having had to leave there because we were actually evacuated with the slides that happened on Highway 1, and so we left earlier than we had planned. But it is encouraging to me to encounter people like you out there in the wild, in the real world, who have naturally learned how to embrace this in their everyday life. You also have come out of a Protestant tradition. You seem to be somewhat of a mystic, where you experience these divine, supernatural encounters with God's presence, where you are so deeply known, and you're just aware of a sacramental reality around you, and just the sense of calling that you have moving forward is just so encouraging and speaks to me. I really am grateful for you sharing this with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me to tell the story. I hope it gives you something. I do.
Yeah, it really does. And sorry, I didn't mean to totally end us right there. I was just felt so inclined to say that. When can we expect to see the film that you're working on now be done? Are we able to view it ourselves?
Are you pressuring me, Sarah?
Or are you not sure yet? No, I just am so excited
me,
after just watching Praying the Hours.
Back off.
After just watching Praying the Hours. Sorry.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm
okay.
I am in that terrible space for filmmakers, which is the the bringing something up from out of nowhere. And
yes. Yeah.
Maybe there are definitely other writers who will feel this way. I feel like I can't get to it. Like I put everything in the way. I'll head in to start writing and find myself, I don't know, re-drywalling the garage or something, and I can't think, how did I get out here? So my instincts for procrastination and for defense against it are really great. And at the same time, if somebody says, hey, since you're not getting to the writing today anyway, why not? Let's go out and, have a cup of coffee or something. And I'm like, are you crazy? I can't leave here. I can't leave here. I have to be here right now. And if all I do here all day for days and days on end is avoid the work, then that's me doing the work, because it's going to happen. It happens this way every time. I have these dreamy dreams that I am going to be like Neil Simon, totally prolific, and fortunately every morning it shows up at 9:00. Well, I don't show up every morning at 9:00, and I admire writers like Dana Gioia, for example, wonderful poet who, when he was working, I think he was working at an ad agency that represented Jell-O or something, and every morning he'd get up at 5 in the morning, and he just would tell himself, I'm just going to write 3 lines. And by the end of the year, he'd have a book of poetry every year. And I cannot tell you how many times I have set myself on schedules, elaborate schedules that accommodate exactly that kind of daily commitment. My friend Elijah Davidson, who's written, by the way, a really wonderful book, a devotional book on film called Come and See. He does that every day before work, 5:30, watches a movie, writes a devotional. I admire it so much. I'm just not that way. I have to capitulate to the way I am, and that is I poke around for a long time, and I live in fear of questions like your beautiful question, when can we expect this? And I think I don't know. I really don't know. I just know that I'm here and I'm doing it. And there will come a moment, because it always comes, where suddenly I will be in. And I'll be halfway through before I look up and think, I'm hungry. What's happening? So, anyway. I don't mean to sound too defensive.
I actually appreciate. No. I appreciate your answer to that and how forthright you were with it, because for those of us, maybe I shouldn't say this might be true for others, but I'll say it's true for me, and if it's true for others, great. When I was on my own journey where I turned towards a new spirituality, a deeper, wider, higher vision of God and understanding of myself, there was a time in that journey where it did get quite painful to be in that space of introspection and healing and recovery. And I wanted to rush past it. And I wanted to begin to create again. I wanted to begin to be again all the things that used to define me, and that the world, I wanted to have the answers. What are you doing now? What do you do? To have to say, well, I don't really do much right now. Or to have to explain or withhold in a hermetic seal the grief that I was experiencing, the intimacy I was experiencing God in that space, to hold that privately, and to just say very simply, I'm not working right now, or I'm not producing, I'm not creating. To live in that tension and to submit to the creative process that is true for me, that sounds like is true for you, that is a discipline in and of itself, maybe a passive spiritual discipline that I discovered that was painful, but also so necessary to not just understand who I was in God, but to understand that the creative process takes time, and it doesn't start and end with me. I submit to being guided and being a place where I receive
and
the
it
inspiration.
It gestates. Why would we be surprised at that?
Yeah.
It's like, in some ways, it's like asking a tree, when are you going to fruit again? Well, I'm going to fruit in season.
Right.
And right now, it's not the season for that, So, it's just how it is. It's just how it works for me. It works differently for different people.
Well, I appreciate... Yeah. You saying that gives us out here still on the journey of becoming permission to let it take time. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so last question. What would you say to somebody who's at the beginning of this journey? Maybe they need to go into the bathroom and say, I don't believe any of it. Take it all. Burn it all to the ground. I don't know. Or any part of your journey that you feel called to speak to right now. What would you say to a leader that's right at the beginning and needs somebody to see them or give them permission to move forward in the way that's true for them?
Yeah. Well, if I could have it in front of me, I would read a poem by Rilke, Rainer Maria Rilke, that is from his Book of Hours. And in it, there's a line where he says, let everything happen to you. Just go out into the world. Let everything happen to you. And essentially his comment is, well, for one thing, he says that in God's voice is saying back to him, let everything happen to you. Come out into the world. Take my hand. It's a beautiful way of expressing that if you believe that God exists and that he loves and that God is omnipotent, all the things, if you do believe that, and that he loves, then it's all for us. So enter without fear. Enter without fear.
Yes,
fear and love are the things that can't exist in the same space. So you were saying
that's so true. I found the poem. Shall I read it to close us out?
You crazy. Yes, do it.
Okay. Go to the limits of your longing is what the poem is titled. And it goes like this. God speaks to each of us as he makes us, then walks with us silently out of the night. These are the words we dimly hear. You, sent out beyond your recall, go to the limits of your longing, embody me. Flare up like a flame and make big shadows I can move in. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me. Nearby is the country they call life. You will know it by its seriousness. Give me your hand. It's beautiful. It's very beautiful. Yeah. And that's the one you were speaking of.
That's right.
Yeah, it does slay. Well, thank you, Lauralee. I so appreciate your time. You've been so generous with your time.
Thank you, Sarah, for the work you're doing.
Kairos time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, too. And thank you for the work you're doing. Super important, really.
Well, thank you for going ahead of us, storytellers, and paving the way. So appreciate you, Lauralee. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Goodbye.
Thank you for joining us today on the Platform to Table podcast. You can find us on Instagram and platformtotable.com. If you're a Christian leader, I'd like to invite you to join us on Monday nights on Zoom at a Platform to Table anonymous meeting. PTA is a trauma-informed 12-step spiritual reformation group for Christian leaders who are struggling with compulsive performing or other codependent behaviors on their platform of leadership. We also have a storytelling monastic retreat, a contemplative writing pilgrimage, and a national park hiking pilgrimage coming next spring. For more information, visit our website. Next week, Dr. Brad Embry will be joining us to share his story of spiritual reformation. Brad has served as a seminary professor and has published extensively in the field of Old Testament studies. He currently resides with his wife and children at the Nashotah House in Wisconsin, where he is training for the priesthood. Subscribe and sign up for our newsletter to be the first to know when it goes live.